I am a 37-year-old woman who has been happily married to her husband, Dave, for 10 years. Dave, a talented auto mechanic, is 36 years old and has impressive experience in this industry. He devoted his youth and early adulthood to honing his skills, working in various car service stations. Thanks to his dedication and careful economy, he eventually realized his dream. He opened his own car service. Dave embodies all the qualities that a person looks for in an ideal husband. He is not only affectionate but also possesses all the qualities of a truly good person. Dave is a person who embodies such qualities as caring, compassion, and loyalty, especially as a devoted husband. These admirable traits can be explained by his difficult upbringing. Unfortunately, Dave spent his childhood surrounded by an alcoholic father and a troubled man who often returned home intoxicated, hurting Dave's mother despite her efforts to help him in rehabilitation. Dave's father constantly broke down after her graduation. Being the eldest of 3 brothers, Dave's mother was determined not to let her children grow up without a father, and therefore, she had to endure all the hardships associated with his behavior. In adolescence, when Dave boldly stood up for his mother and turned to her with a sincere request to divorce his father, this turning point was the beginning of Dave's path. While continuing to study at school, he got a part-time job as a cleaner in a local garage. It was not long before his determination and ability to learn quickly led to his being promoted to the position of mechanic. At the same time, his mother, who already worked 2 jobs, found new freedom from the burden of supporting her alcoholic husband and his addiction. Despite all the difficulties, Dave managed to find valuable lessons in his father's mistakes and used them as stepping stones on the way to his own personal growth. Dave, my husband and father, defied conventional expectations in the most admirable way. Although he did not receive a higher education, his street smarts and natural wit were the qualities that really fascinated me. He had an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, always adapting quickly and studying. Dave not only prioritized his own personal growth but also played a key role in ensuring the success of his younger brothers, supporting their aspirations to go to college. His dedication to their education was unwavering. In the early stages of our relationship, Dave showed his unyielding work ethic by tirelessly building a home for us. He believed in having a solid foundation before getting married. Despite the fact that we moved in together before getting married, he continued to fulfill his family duties, visiting his mother and checking on his brothers every day. Now, watching the happiness of his brothers' marriages, I am reminded of the profound impact Dave had on their lives. He was not only an example of the exceptional qualities of a husband and father but also helped shape the lives of people around him. Both of us work in a corporate firm and receive solid salaries. Everyone treats Dave with great admiration and respect for his constant dedication and self-sacrifice. In addition, Dave's mother has an exceptionally kind nature and treats me like her own daughter. Every time she comes to visit, she brings delicious homemade cookies still warm from the oven. Watching Dave's sincere love and concern for his family only strengthened my affection for him. Unlike Dave, I was lucky enough to grow up in a stable family. Both my parents were high school teachers, which provided my brother and me with education and security. Although we were not well off, my parents made sure that we had everything we needed for a decent life. Interestingly, Dave and I knew each other pretty well since he worked in a nearby garage located just 2 blocks from my house. Living in a small town, everyone recognized each other by sight and knew their neighbors, at least by sight. After successfully obtaining a higher education in the field of mass communications, I was happy to start working at one of the local news channels. As a child, my parents instilled in me the importance of independence, especially financial independence, and my mother played a significant role in instilling this trait in me. Therefore, I never perceived Dave through the prism of social relations and did not feel any differences between us. I have always appreciated him as an exceptional person. It was only when I bought my first car at the age of 23 that our relationship began to develop. My parents always stressed that we should achieve everything ourselves, and this determined our decisions. I often visited the garage where he worked, and it was there that Dave often serviced my car. Over time, a friendship developed between us, which turned into a romantic relationship. Surprisingly, my parents did not object to Dave, admiring his resilience and ability to overcome difficult circumstances and provide for the family. They saw him as a driving force for their own improvement. From the very beginning of our relationship, I made it clear to Dave that I didn't want to have children. Having children was never part of my plans. At first, Dave was disappointed because he was looking forward to becoming a father. There was even a possibility that he was thinking about ending our relationship. But in the end, he accepted the idea of remaining childless, although with the desire to have a cat. Therefore, after the conclusion of the marriage union, we decided to have 2 charming cats. Our marriage was developing, and it seemed that everything was going smoothly. Perhaps it was this sense of security that made me lose my concentration. Since Dave was a reliable person, I didn't feel anxious about the hearth. He always took care of me emotionally and satisfied any of my desires. I am sure that sometimes it is necessary to overcome difficulties so that a person is completely collected and does not depart from the goal. A couple of months ago, I met a guy in the office. I'll call him Tom. Tom is 27 years old, and he joined the company quite recently. He always kept to himself as he had no acquaintances yet. At lunchtime, more during rest hours when we all spent time together, as a new face in the office, he naturally felt out of place. Often newcomers sought solace in this secluded corner, but there was some inexplicable attraction in it. Perhaps it was the longing and tension that were reflected in his eyes, although I couldn't say for sure. A few days later, I plucked up the courage and approached him with an offer to join our company and drink coffee. Without hesitation, he graciously accepted my offer. I asked him about the feelings of loneliness in the new office, to which he only nodded and admitted that the feeling of isolation is not limited to the workplace. As a newcomer to the city, he admitted that he had no friends in the area. Being fond of animation and online games, he decided to settle in the city center, although he was from the outskirts. The family continued to live on their farm. For some inexplicable reason, I wanted to find friends for him and make him feel like a more complete member of our company. I often invited him to join me during coffee breaks, but it was a purely professional relationship. I never considered him a friend. Interestingly, during his training, he was transferred to my team, which brought us closer. We started taking breaks, having lunch, and sometimes even having dinner together. I couldn't help but notice that he was constantly talking on the phone, claiming to be working on his online project or communicating with his community. I've always considered it a bore's interest, so I've never delved into this topic. That's when I started cheating on Dave. Dave expected us to have dinner together at least once a day. He left for work early, and I stayed in bed. But at the same time, he made sure that we had dinner together, even on the days when I came home late. He waited patiently for me so that we could have dinner together. But when Tom appeared, it became more difficult to coordinate everything. I started lying to Dave, claiming that I had a dinner planned with clients because I couldn't say that I actually decided to stay at work and have dinner with a junior colleague. From time to time, I was overcome with guilt when I enjoyed Tom's company, but I justified my actions by convincing myself that this did not count as treason since there was no physical contact. There were times when I thought about ending my relationship with Tom, but Dave was constantly busy with important things. Tom's laid-back personality was so charming that it had a calming effect on me while I was at work. What mattered even more was that he genuinely adored me. I must admit I was pleased with this attention. It encouraged me to pay more attention to my appearance at work, choosing bold options, for example, red tight-fitting outfits that emphasized my figure. I couldn't help but notice the subtle admiration and playful power dynamics between us. Considering that I've been married to Dave for 10 years, and before that, I dated him for about 3 years, I haven't experienced such attention from the opposite sex for a long time. It was wonderful. I really appreciated the fact that he complimented each of my things and accessories. Then I fell in love with my colleague named Tom. It turned out that he is an influential person in social networks and has an impressive audience of more than 190,000 people. However, he confided in me, asking me to keep this information to myself as he did not want it to affect his professional life. I found out that he also broadcasts on the Twitch channel, gathering an average of more than 20,000 viewers. Recently, he invited me to his home studio where he conducts his live broadcasts. I felt excited and curious as I have always been interested in media and social platforms. I wasn't familiar with Twitch, which is pretty funny considering how much effort we put into communicating with people. Surprisingly, he managed to independently gather a significant audience on the internet. During our first meeting in a secluded place, I was both excited and intrigued, wanting to learn more about his field of activity. Although I convinced myself that my curiosity was caused solely by my interest in the media, deep down, I felt that my body and mind were anticipating the upcoming events. I went into his studio and was amazed at how minimalistic his setup was compared to the one I was used to. Moreover, it also smelled much nicer. Unable to resist, I immediately started dreaming about my own show and inundated him with questions about his streaming broadcasts. But he chose not to answer some of them, insisting that I wait for the live broadcast and then I can really feel the atmosphere of the production. When we sat down opposite each other, he turned to face the camera and began a live broadcast, talking casually about his weaknesses. Tom conducted a live broadcast where he willingly answered questions and shared valuable sports tips for training in the gym. Although he usually broadcasts live games, today everything was different. It was an intense interactive broadcast allowing viewers to actively communicate with him. Watching this side of Tom, I couldn't help but feel his charisma. Watching him, I noticed that one of the screens, which displayed dynamic analytics and numbers, was accompanied by a lively chat conversation. Unfortunately, I was unable to decipher its contents due to my own fears. I chose to remain mostly in the role of a silent spectator, avoiding possible visibility on the screen. I remained behind the scenes, unknown to anyone, because he promised that he would not recognize my presence. The live broadcast went on for an hour until he finally finished it. After finishing the broadcast, Tom asked what I was thinking, and we exchanged joking phrases. During the conversation, I gradually got closer to his screen, doubting whether it was really turned off. To my relief, it was really turned off, and we ended up in his studio. I appreciated his kind gesture by offering me another drink, but this time he offered to drink on the couch. He perched on the couch with his hands on my hips. I think I will receive a significant share of criticism for this statement, but I did not feel any guilt when we entered into an intimate relationship. At first, I thought it would be an isolated case, and yet an electric sensation swept through my body, forcing me to completely dissolve into it. It was an intense and unbridled experience. It is important to understand that at home, Dave did not show any signs of insanity. Therefore, I realized that I do not feel any remorse. After this meeting, there was not even the slightest hint of regret that I expected. When I got home, I saw Dave asleep. Looking at his pure image made me feel remorseful, but I tried to explain that my affection for Dave outweighs any fleeting connection with Tom. Despite all my inner assurances, some part of me longed for something more. And so, a few days later, I plucked up the courage and asked Tom if we could meet again. In response, he asked me if I meant to eat or just sit over a cup of coffee. I don't know if he understood my subtle hint or just assumed an indifferent look. I remained in the dark. I was confused by his puzzled answer, and I muttered the word coffee inaudibly. When I returned to my workplace, I felt confused. It was only at that moment that I realized that Tom's behavior had changed since that evening. Not knowing about it, I decided to visit his apartment on Friday evening, but in the end, we never saw each other, and we didn't exchange a single word all weekend. On Monday and Tuesday, due to a busy work schedule, I was unable to communicate with him. Then, starting on Wednesday, Tom took a vacation and returned only yesterday, that is, on Thursday. We refrained from social media communication, preferring to communicate face to face. I spent the whole day thinking that he wasn't interested in me. In the end, I decided not to ask him out but to wait until he takes the initiative. I watched as he was absorbed in his work, burying his head in it. But in the evening, he contacted me via WhatsApp from my work phone, apologizing for his busy schedule and inability to have coffee with me. By this point, I had already forgotten that I had made the invitation at all. I told him that I understood him, however, his intentions remained unclear to me. Was he looking for a one-time meeting, or did he feel too guilty to continue? Maybe I didn't suit him enough. I am in limbo. In addition, I am most concerned about whether he will blackmail me or take any actions that could jeopardize my marriage. The unknown does not give me rest. I am tormented by a sense of guilt. It seems to me that I betrayed my faithful husband, and all because of this man who now began to ignore me after one passionate night spent together. The severity of this situation is suffocating me from the inside, and I can't bring myself to tell anyone about it. I understand that what I did was disgusting, so I don't need to point out my unreliability, abomination, or that I behaved badly. I'm just asking for your presence and support." It took about 3 weeks, and my life took a complete 180-degree turn. I do not know how I managed to survive in this situation, let alone how I will live on. After his first WhatsApp message, in which he regretted that he declined my invitation for coffee, I felt obliged to find out if he had lost interest in meeting me. But I hesitated, fearing his possible refusal. I desperately hoped that he would not refuse me, but on the contrary, I really wanted him to want me for who I am. After thinking about it, I plucked up the courage and directly asked why he was avoiding me. He quickly replied that he was not deliberately ignoring me but was busy with work. In search of additional reassurance, I asked if I had not met his expectations that day. To my relief, he said that I had surpassed all his wildest fantasies. He mentioned that a cousin had come to visit him who would stay with him for a long time, which did not allow him to take me to his home. In response, I quickly offered to meet at my place, based solely on my own desires. I just wanted to understand him better, so I willingly agreed. Sensing my despair, he intensified it even more. In turn, he demanded that I thoroughly describe my desires and expectations from our next meeting. Without hesitation, I agreed and scrupulously wrote down all the details. Before we met again, I repeatedly replayed all my desires in my head. Our WhatsApp communication started over the weekend and led to the moment when I invited him to my humble abode on Thursday, which I will now call D-Day. On that momentous day, Dave went to the car service not knowing that I decided to stay at home. I quietly took sick leave at work, and Tom told our manager that he would work remotely that day. Finally, in the afternoon, he arrived, which marked the beginning of Thursday. Amid the bustle of other people, no one seemed to pay attention to the appearance of guests in my house. Moreover, our house was located in an area where undoubtedly most of the residents were busy with work at that hour. As soon as Tom crossed the threshold of the house, I readily obeyed him. It is not clear why, but a feeling of foreboding told me that this meeting would be the last. Therefore, I tried to cherish every moment spent together as much as possible, even though Tom insisted on leaving in 2 hours. I begged him to stay for a while longer. Deep down, I knew it was a riskier decision to leave him. The sun was setting, and there was a possibility that Dave would come home, but my thoughts were preoccupied with the special bond that connected Tom and me, and the likelihood that Dave would return seemed negligible to me. Eventually, around 5 o'clock in the evening, Tom left. At that moment, I realized that I had locked the cats in one of the cramped rooms because Tom did not like them. The cats continued to stubbornly scratch at the door, desperately striving for freedom as they could not get to their toilet and food. As soon as I released them, I immediately began to put myself in order. I decorated the house with my favorite fragrance, took a refreshing shower, and cleaned myself up. Dave usually got home by 7 o'clock in the evening, and I waited patiently for his arrival. But when the clock struck 9 o'clock in the evening, he was nowhere to be found. Worried, I tried to contact him by phone, but he did not answer. Trying to confirm our plans for dinner together, I sent him a text message anxiously asking about the time of his arrival, but my message went unanswered, leaving me in a state of uncertainty. He seemed distant and taciturn despite my attempts to create a warm and cozy atmosphere. There was tension in the air. I couldn't help feeling disappointed, doubting that my attempts to make Dave happy were in vain. Still, I pushed these thoughts aside and willingly served him his favorite lasagna, hoping that it would bring a smile to his face. Unfortunately, this only exacerbated his disinterest. Gradually, the silence between us grew louder, drowning out any semblance of former happiness. My gesture didn't surprise him, and he just walked into the room without reacting in any way. He took a quick shower, changed his clothes, and headed for the bed. I excitedly told him that I had prepared lasagna especially for him, but he preferred the porridge left over from the previous day. Worried, I tried to find out what might be bothering him, but he remained silent, as if my words had gone unheard. Gathering my resolve, I repeated my question, and my voice trembled slightly. Perhaps sensing my concern, he abruptly got up from his seat and headed for the dining room. I followed him closely, and an uneasy silence enveloped us. Wanting to relieve tension, I started arranging dishes with food, handing him a plate. I sat down at the table directly opposite him. Thoughts raced through my head about the many possible reasons for Dave's gloomy mood, while Tom's presence loomed in my thoughts. I desperately tried to suppress it, as the mere thought that my betrayal could be revealed increased my anxiety. Finally, Dave broke the silence by speaking. "Is this the guy from work?" Confused, he repeated his question. "I mean, the guy who came to our house today. Does he work with you?" My heart sank as my true emotions showed on my face, but I desperately tried to pull myself together. "Which guy are you talking about?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation in a different direction. Dave took a deep breath and continued, "The one you lock up cats for. I saw everything through the video camera of the cat feeding machine." Before I could answer, he had already said enough to make me speechless. Although I confirmed that I have dealt a serious blow, I felt obliged to reduce the consequences, acting out of self-defense. I raised my voice at Dave, urging him to stop his actions, and tried to grab his phone to understand how he got access to my messages. I assumed that he got into my phone while I was sleeping, but he explained that a few days ago he accidentally logged into my laptop where my WhatsApp work account was active. From there, he came across these messages and extracted them. It became clear that Dave wanted to catch us in the act, hoping to expose our misdeeds. Fortunately, there was no mention in the chat about the specific day when Tom and I planned to meet. This lucky omission saved me from serious embarrassment. Just the thought of Dave catching me with Tom was terrifying. Out of frustration, I couldn't resist raising my voice at Dave for invading my personal life. Of course, it was a stupid reaction, but I felt obligated to say something, didn't I? I tried to convince Dave that nothing special was happening, that this was just a one-time occurrence. Deep down, I knew that my WhatsApp conversation with Tom had started just a few days before our second meeting. During the conversation, we discussed our plans for the future, but our previous experience was not supported by any evidence in the chat. I tried desperately to convince him that our physical encounter was a one-off and assured him that it would never happen again. Unfortunately, my beliefs went unnoticed as Dave seemed to be completely absorbed in his phone, not paying attention to my words. Disappointed, I impulsively grabbed his phone, urging him to listen to my words. To my surprise, I noticed that he was communicating with a person who gave his official name. I wonder if this is a lawyer. Confused, I begged him to stop his actions, desperate to get a chance to justify myself. I clung to his knees and sobbed, begging him to give me one last chance, but he remained adamant, not uttering a word in response to my entreaties. When he finally broke the silence, he calmly asked me to leave the room. I was shocked because I did not expect his refusal. Overwhelmed with grief, I kept asking for forgiveness, but he didn't react. "Your tears are unnecessary and a waste of time. Save them for the future," he said calmly. I realized he was right. His decision was firm, at least for the moment. The house we lived in belonged to Dave, as he had built it before our marriage, and I had no rights to it. Moreover, I had no desire to enter into contentious battles over property and finances. I wasn't interested in material values, I only wanted Dave. When it was late at night, I told him that I would leave home the next morning. It was well past midnight. He agreed with my decision and said that he was satisfied with it, but asked me to be gone by the time he returned home the next day. With a heavy heart, I took his hand, begging him to stay. I convinced him that he could sleep in a separate room and that I would not disturb him. In response, he said that he could not be under the same roof with me, shook off my hand, and left. Despite the strong desire to leave the house immediately, I did not resist and stayed, hoping that the next day Dave's emotions would settle down. Tears were streaming down my face all night, and I scolded myself for ruining our once happy marriage. The next morning, I deliberately didn't go to the office, anxiously waiting for Dave to return. When the clock struck 7 in the evening, Dave finally came home as usual, but his tired gaze met mine, and I sighed with annoyance. All attempts to communicate with him turned out to be useless. He abruptly attacked me, saying that he did not want new conflicts and demanded that I leave the house immediately. At that moment, I realized the bitter truth: my husband was no more. So, I quickly packed my things and left the house in a hurry, going on an aimless journey in my car, not knowing where to go next. In the end, after driving a few kilometers, I found myself in front of the only shelter in which I dared to seek solace, Tom's apartment. At that tense moment, I completely ignored the fact that his cousin lives with Tom. Without thinking, I went up the stairs, clutching my purse, leaving all my things in the car. The last thing I wanted to do was cause Tom to panic. When I entered his apartment and found him all alone, I immediately hugged him tightly. Concerned about my unexpected late arrival, he asked about my well-being. Overwhelmed with emotions, I couldn't hold back my tears. I poured out my heart, telling him how Dave found out about our affair, humiliated me, and finally forced me to leave our house. Tom invited me into the apartment, noticing that I was shaking, and kindly handed me a cozy blanket. I gratefully accepted it, feeling cold in my bones after 2 days of poor nutrition. Trembling, I gathered my strength and talked about what had happened. Tears were streaming down my face. Despite my refusal, Tom insisted on offering me a bowl of hearty soup. Reluctantly, I sat there, continuing to cry, and he patiently poured me soup from a spoon. Then, he hugged me tightly, giving me comfort and warmth. Our connection remained intimate, but this time it was gentle and soothing, devoid of any wildness. Continuing to talk about how I was overwhelmed with suffering, I expressed my determination not to give up. Tom, in turn, tried to comfort me and offered to get some sleep. He said that in the morning, we would solve our problems. Then, I remembered Tom's cousin who was temporarily staying with him. Tom said that his cousin had gone to visit friends and would be back the next day. Exhausted by the constant tears and lamentations of the last few days, I quickly fell asleep, finding solace in Tom's warm and cozy embrace. When I woke up, I saw that Tom was still sound asleep. Realizing that I needed to take a shower, I soon noticed that my toiletries were still in the car. Having made my decision, I went downstairs, took all the suitcases, and brought them to the apartment. After taking a refreshing shower and getting dressed, I couldn't help but look disheveled due to many hours of tears and complaints. Trying to lighten the mood, I made toast and coffee for myself and Tom. When he woke up, I hugged him tightly and thanked him for his constant support. When we sat down for breakfast, Tom mentioned that he had plans with friends and asked about the time of my departure. His question put me in a complete daze. I gently took his hand, gathering the courage to offer to start our relationship with a clean slate. I sincerely invited him to move in together. When my words hung in the air, he glared at me with a look full of uncertainty and firmly said that he did not want to build a relationship with me. Confused, I asked him about the reasons. He replied that he felt too young to commit himself and longed for a carefree existence devoid of the burden of past hobbies. When I asked him how, sincerely, he confessed to me that he had confessed earlier. He constantly confessed his love to me despite my doubts about the age difference and unwillingness to develop a relationship. He convinced me that he didn't care about age. But when I asked him a question, he first confirmed with a serious expression on his face that it was all just words. He explained that men often say things to impress women without making any sense. This revelation threw me into complete confusion. I reminded him that I had sacrificed my marriage in order to be with him, but he quickly shifted the blame onto me, claiming that he had never asked me to end my relationship with Dave. He went so far as to say that I alone was responsible for the consequences I faced. Our dispute flared up to such an extent that I began to threaten him by revealing his true identity to his subscribers. I warned him that I would expose his deceitfulness and how he manipulated me, which ultimately led to the destruction of my life. In response, he laughed. "Cruel of you. You mean my Twitch subscribers?" he asked. "Well, do you at least know my username?" I looked at him doubtfully, deciding not to give up. I felt a hint of deception in his voice. Although I am not familiar with Twitch and did not know anything about the specific identifier or the way to access the platform, I refused to back down. As if to prove my point, I grabbed my phone and quickly downloaded the Twitch app. When I registered my Twitch account, my heart started pounding in my chest, and my jaw clenched with excitement and anticipation. I kept looking from the phone to the person sitting next to me, desperately hoping for his support or at least a hint of willingness to help me, but all I got in response were bursts of laughter. He carelessly paced around his kitchen and living room, busy with everyday things. The taunts about my decision to join Twitch only deepened my frustration. I made countless attempts, going through all possible variants of their name in the hope of finding their account, but my attempts were in vain, which made me even more desperate. Sensing my disappointment, he finally suggested that I stop searching, calling the entire platform a fiction. In fact, Tom has never had 190,000 subscribers, and the audience of his broadcasts has never exceeded 20,000 people. Knowing that I am not familiar with Twitch, he took advantage of my ignorance and managed to deceive me. Confused, I asked him how he managed it. Caught off guard, he confessed that he had used a fake app to impress me. He claimed that he had bet with his friend that he could win me over during the first week, but it turned out that impressing me was harder than he had expected. Trying to attract my attention and manipulate me, he considered the idea of luring a naive girl with false gestures, for example, to show that he had a large circle of fans. As soon as I heard this, darkness seemed to envelop me, forcing me to cry uncontrollably until I could barely catch my breath. How could I be so stupid? Unlike the previous one, he did not offer any consolation or reassurance but abruptly forced me to pack my things and leave. The whole situation seemed unreal and incomprehensible, and I completely fainted. In the end, he unceremoniously threw my things out of the apartment, and I silently left, looking like a ghost. I went down the stairs, clutching my luggage tightly in my hands, and found myself on the spot surrounded by an incessant downpour and intermittent snowflakes. The icy cold pierced through me, making me shiver, confused and unsure of my next actions. Unable to stay with friends or stay in a hotel for a few days or weeks, I had no choice but to seek refuge in my parents' house. Arriving home, I saw my mother, who was alone since my father had gone on a business trip. The surprise of my visit pleasantly surprised her. I said I wanted to spend time with her, considering she was alone. In response, she asked how things were going in my marriage, to which I replied that everything was fine. At the same time, I added that we just needed a temporary break from each other, which was the real reason for my decision to stay with her. She reacted to this with understanding because my parents also sometimes took breaks and went on solo trips or to nature with friends to recuperate. Unfortunately, I woke up at night feeling unwell and having a high fever. The next day, I was diagnosed with viral fever. I called work and informed them that my health condition was still severe, and there was a possibility that it would last longer than expected. During all this difficult time, my strength gradually decreased while I was recuperating at my mother's house. I didn't receive any messages from Dave or his family. There were no messages with questions about when I would pick up the remaining things from our shared house or about how our cats were doing. He even blocked my access to the cat feeding chamber despite my attempts to contact him. Feeling ashamed, I plucked up the courage and called him twice. As soon as the phone rang for the third time, I abruptly cut off the call. It was clear to my mother that something was wrong, and she persistently asked me to trust her, but I begged her to give me time and space. I asked her to refrain from communicating with Dave and not to tell my father about anything. Despite my requests, she continued to put pressure on me, and I burst into tears, confessing that I had done something terrible to Dave. Through tears, I begged her to be patient and wait until I was ready. In the end, she gave up and hugged me, assuring me that she understood, but I promised to tell her about it before my father arrived. My mom is wonderful. She took care of me and gave me the opportunity to think, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth yet. As soon as I recovered from the fever, I went back to work. Surprisingly, Tom wasn't even interested in my well-being. He ignored me and seemed to see right through me. In the office, I also refrained from talking to him. I was struck by his unusual behavior towards me, considering that it was he who betrayed me. Now, looking back, I understand that there were many ambiguous signs in his actions, but I foolishly did not pay attention to them. This is the essence of the problem. I naively believed that I was reliable and smart enough to avoid any harm, especially from a person I thought I knew so well. But I was the victim of his deception, which made me wonder if I deserved such a position. It's been a week since I found shelter with my mother, desperately trying to move forward and rebuild my life. I often thought about turning to Dave's mother in the hope of reconciliation, but deep down, I knew that my act was unforgivable. The thought of facing my mother-in-law, who has always been kind to me, fills me with fear and shame. How can I bear the burden of this shame? I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that Dave is going to divorce me. Getting divorce papers is only a matter of time, and I still have so much to understand and figure out: how to tell my parents about it, what to do to fix our life with Dave, or maybe I'll be able to meet Dave if I ask to see our cats. I feel like no one can get me out of this. It seemed to me that my life had reached the bottom. Almost a month has passed since the day when everything collapsed, and I went to work in the studio, waiting for another routine day. I didn't know yet that my supervisor wanted to see me in his office. Reluctantly, I entered and saw that he was holding a pack in his hands. Inside were indisputable proofs of my affair with Tom. There was also a transcript of the chat and a video taken by the camera of our cat feeding machine, which Dave was talking about. It was clear that Dave had sent this evidence to my workplace. My supervisor was well aware of our company's strict policy regarding relationships between colleagues. In a difficult moment, I stood before him in tears, desperately begging for an opportunity. But he told me that Tom had already been fired without giving me an opportunity to clarify the situation. Unfortunately, I received the news of my demotion. If earlier I was the host of one of the segments of the daytime show on weekends, now I was transferred to a desk job where I had to do research for other presenters. While sitting, I begged my supervisor to let me stay in my previous position, but he told me that he had already defended me to the top management in order to keep my job. According to company policy, I should have been fired along with Tom, but thanks to my experience and stable work throughout my time at the company, I managed to keep my job. For me, it was an incredibly awkward moment that I will never forget. In just a few days, this news spread like wildfire through the studio and office, becoming the most discussed topic. Previously, people would playfully roll their eyes when they saw Tom and me together at lunch, when we took coffee orders from others. Now that Tom was fired and I was demoted, it didn't take them long to connect the dots. As expected, the news of my demotion quickly spread throughout the office. And to top it all off, I was transferred to a less noticeable desk in the back of the office. At that moment, I had a great desire to quit. If we were in a big city, I would have made this decision instantly. But we were in the city, and although it wasn't exactly suburban, it didn't have the job prospects that would be more available in New York, California, or Los Angeles, the thriving centers of my industry. In addition, I did not have a husband to rely on for support, and I did not expect to receive alimony, since Dave made a sincere effort to do so. Apparently, he did not show any intention to provide me with compensation or support in this situation, which would lead to unemployment. Oddly enough, I began to regret the decision not to have children. If Dave and I had a child together, it would allow us to keep an open line of communication between us. Maybe Dave would have given me another opportunity, or maybe I would never have backed away from him if only I had a child to take care of. At the moment, I haven't told my mother about it yet. As soon as I returned to work, she stopped demanding explanations from me. I was waiting for the right moment to confess to her, but one fateful day after work, reality hit me in the face, and I wished I had told her about it earlier. Almost 2 months have passed since the day when this incident occurred. As soon as I entered the house, Mom handed me the divorce papers that she had kept. It is unknown for how long. I confessed that I wanted to confess, but I was seized with fear. A flurry of anger hit me. She raised her voice, insisting that I should have told her about it within 2 months. Unfortunately, I was unable to fulfill this obligation and instead resorted to repeated deception. When the divorce papers came, she turned to Dave with a question about the reasons for my actions. Dave, being honest, told her the truth, and she courageously tried to protect me by suggesting a possible misunderstanding. But Dave began to show her irrefutable evidence. At that moment, I came to the conclusion that even if Mom hadn't asked, he would have willingly shared the evidence, since it was clear that his intention was to destroy and ruin me. Dave, of course, was not going to provide me with any financial support and asked for a divorce. Naturally, I didn't expect anything from him. I don't think I deserve his money, and I don't need it. A few days later, my father returned from a business trip, and my mother told him all the details. He was furious and dejected by how easily I destroyed my 10-year marriage, and even without good reason, disappointed. He said that he doubted that he really knew me. Before I could talk to Dave, my father contacted him and offered his sincere apologies for my actions. Despite Dave's polite behavior towards me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought shame on my parents because I put them in such circumstances. They felt uncomfortable because of my actions. Overwhelmed with guilt, tears flowed down my face as I asked them for forgiveness. While my mom tried to comfort me and calm me down, I desperately begged my father to step in and convince Dave to give up the idea of a divorce. At that moment, My father looked up at me and sternly declared that divorce was inevitable, advising me to mentally prepare for it. A few days later, I plucked up the courage and officially signed the divorce papers. It finally dawned on me that this chapter of my life had come to an end. The longer I delayed the divorce, the more it hurt me. It was time to let go of the situation and move forward. Unfortunately, the situation at my workplace also became unbearable. People stopped not only communicating with me but also discussing me. The news of my divorce spread, and their versions of events began to coincide. Although there were elements of truth in their gossip, it was unpleasant to feel at the center of such immoral conversations in the office, especially from people I once considered friends. I was met with indifference and speculation, which created a toxic environment that eventually led to me quitting my job 3 months after D-Day. In the early days, I found solace in my childhood bed, spending countless hours watching movies and eating junk food. As a result of this unhealthy lifestyle, I gained 12 kilograms of weight in just 2 weeks. Fortunately, my mother intervened and sent me for treatment as I completely lost interest in life. My only desire was to bring Dave back into my life, as I felt an urgent need for him. As a last-ditch effort, Mom asked Dave for a meeting. I desperately begged him to meet me, laid out the details of my miserable existence, and assured him that I would prove my worth if only I was given another opportunity. But Dave flatly rejected my request. Although I agreed to all his conditions, he said that he was unable to tolerate deception. He remembered his great desire to become a father, a dream that he sacrificed just to be with me. Mom came back disappointed, saying that I had stupidly lost a wonderful person for nothing. Not a single pebble was left. I wanted to ruin Tom, but he already left town soon after he was fired. It's been over 2 months since I started therapy, but I doubt it will bring me any comfort, so I decided to move out of this suffocating environment. Everywhere I turn, everyone I meet constantly reminds me of Dave or starts a conversation about him. Escaping from my childhood home is necessary because I can't even look into my father's eyes. Seeing the shame in his eyes when he looks at me, the rumor of my infidelity and subsequent divorce quickly spread throughout the district. Everywhere I go, I am met with a cold reception and awkward looks at public events. It is becoming increasingly clear to me that I cannot continue to live in such an environment and count on a future life. The situation is aggravated by the fact that I have been unemployed for more than 3 months, and it is no longer possible to count on the financial support of my parents. As a result, I decided to move to the Bay Area. I'm boarding a plane tomorrow morning, hoping to put my past behind me and start my life with a clean slate. Yes, I understand that I destroyed everything myself, but believe me, I paid more than double the price for it. 3 years have passed since, and as I mentioned, I moved to the Bay Area after a difficult period in my life. I faced numerous difficulties in finding employment, lived in a modest apartment with 2 other women, and, in fact, was forced to rebuild my entire life from scratch because of one mistake. I lost my hometown, a successful career, friends, beloved pets, and even my family. Sometimes I wonder if this mistake really led to such grave consequences. I never thought that I would have to pay such a huge price for it. I don't know if I talked about it, but I never intended to leave my hometown. Although I admit that there are people in my city who are eager to settle in a bustling metropolis, I have always found satisfaction in my surroundings, even during my student years and at the beginning of my professional career. My parents were interested in whether I had a desire to move to a livelier city, but I invariably refused. Maybe you can just call me traditional, but that's the way I am. On the other hand, my brother, having received his education, went to California and has since made it her permanent residence. My life took an unexpected turn, forcing me to move to another city and start a new life in an unfamiliar city, and all this at the age of about 30. This transition turned out to be very difficult, especially when it came to establishing new friendships. People of my age group seemed to be happy with their social circle, completely immersed in family life. Those who were looking for new communication did not suit me very well, and I felt isolated. But thanks to perseverance, I gradually rebuilt my life. Similarly, there were obstacles on my professional path that I had to overcome. Instead of the leading role I was hoping for, I was offered a position as an analyst in the back office and not a role on any channel. My plans did not include fighting for the coveted primetime spot on the leading channel, as this is usually done by more experienced employees, but I was hoping to get at least one 15 to 30-minute program on a local channel. Unfortunately, this opportunity did not present itself to me. I was disappointed to realize that many channels rejected my application only because of my age, preferring younger employees to represent their brand. At my previous job, the details of which are clearly stated in my letter of resignation, I worked mainly on a local channel that had a strong bias towards right-wing politics. This experience, although not considered very rich in the affluent San Francisco Bay Area, allowed me to gain valuable knowledge. In addition, I had the opportunity to work on a channel in a small town that adhered to the aforementioned political views. Despite the limitations of this position, it allowed me to get a complete picture of the dynamics of the development of such an environment. In my last company, thanks to a stable job, I was ready for a promotion as a primetime host. But because of Dave's exposure, an unpleasant incident occurred that prevented my promotion. I am currently working as an editor, diligently checking grammar and sentence structure behind the scenes. Maybe it's not the most exciting activity, but it's certainly better than doing nothing. I recently celebrated my 40th birthday, which coincided with my first vacation after the divorce. Deciding to be alone, I went to Florida. But despite the sincere desire to enjoy this holiday, I was faced with the fact that I could not fully enjoy it. It's a shame to watch how women of my age spend holidays with their spouses and children, and I'm left alone. When I leave the house for groceries, I can't help but feel a pang of envy watching busy moms with children. Of course, there are single women who seem to enjoy their independence, but they chose to be single themselves, while it was not my choice. I never wanted to be alone since I reached the age when I can go on dates, and for me, it was 15 years. I have never experienced loneliness. True, I have 2 cats that I just adore, but this is not the same at all. I've been trying to start dating other single women, but it seems something went wrong, and I can't pinpoint exactly what it is. I have become less inclined to socialize and now prefer solitude. Although I know that I have the potential to become a good partner again, the problem, of course, arises when I try to establish new friendships or make acquaintances. People often ask about my past, and I still feel a huge sense of shame telling them that I cheated on my husband and caused him irreparable damage. At the time, I told several women about this, whom I made friends with in the library, but their harsh condemnation only increased my embarrassment. When I reveal my true self, each person's reaction is different. Given past experience, I refrain from revealing my story, but this approach is fraught with certain difficulties. Strangers perceive me as suspicious when I try to hide my past, which makes them either distance themselves or maintain superficial communication, which only increases discomfort. Can you imagine how much suffering I experience as a result? And as if that's not enough, my mother recently told me about something that completely turned my mental state around. During a recent phone conversation with my mother, she once again urged me to reconsider my prospects in terms of dating and marriage. As always, she has been my only source of support throughout all these years. Unfortunately, my father actually disowned me, believing that I had disgraced his family. Therefore, from the moment of departure, I refrained from returning home. If my mother visits me once every 2 years, then my brother has not been involved in our lives since he moved to California. Being a busy banker, he rarely finds time to visit us. She thought it was for my own good and that I needed someone to lean on. Despite my protests, Mom continued to worry about my well-being. During our conversation last week, she started talking about marriage again, encouraging me to make new acquaintances and dates. But I was determined to refuse her request. In a rage, she turned to conflict, urging me to move on, as Dave, who now lives a contented family life, did. In a moment of frustration, she almost gave out this information. Unable to resist curiosity, I asked about Dave's marital status. Reluctantly, she told me that shortly after our divorce, Dave remarried and now he had twins, a boy and a girl. To my surprise, even cats seemed to be living successfully. Just a few weeks ago, the children celebrated their first birthday. Dave took it upon himself to organize a grand celebration of their birthday in a local community hall. When I found out about all this, tears welled up in my eyes. Mom noticed my frustration and advised me to forget about the past. Deep down, I wanted to move forward, but the weight of my mistakes weighed heavily on my heart. How could I find peace knowing that I sacrificed my once perfect life for the fleeting pleasure of a lying person? With a far-fetched feeling, it was a bitter pill to swallow. I understand that you may think that I deserve this shot. Perhaps you are right. When I found out that Dave was happily married and a happy father of 2 children, I felt a cutting pain in my heart. There was a feeling that a knife was stabbed into my heart. Dave took full revenge on me for my betrayal, and he lives happily. He destroyed me completely. He took everything from me, and although it was my own fault, I did not expect such terrible revenge from him. After finishing the conversation with my mother, I collapsed on the floor in pain. I understood that I had to try to call for medical help, but I didn't see the point of living on. And yet, pulling myself together, I dialed the emergency number. I had a microstroke, and its consequences led me to complete anemia of my left hand, which complicated my life. I understand that I am to blame for everything that is happening to me right now, but if Dave wasn't so vengeful, maybe everything would be much better than it is now. Sitting in my SUV parked outside the cafe, using free internet access, I felt I had to write about it. I have replayed this scenario countless times in my head, and now I really want clarity. Story 2. It's been a little over a week since I made the difficult decision to leave my family after Thanksgiving. My wife, a 36-year-old woman, our daughter, a 13-year-old girl, and I, a 37-year-old man, were seemingly one. But everything changed when I accidentally found out about my wife's infidelity. I was completely confused by the shock because I believed that our marriage was built on a solid foundation. Once, there was a lot of intimacy between us. We spent hours in sincere conversations. We regularly arranged date nights and even shared our hobbies. We were both healthy and fit enough, and overall everything seemed fine. But when I found out about my wife's infidelity, it turned out that she preferred not me but someone else. It was hard to imagine that the person I considered my closest person could betray me in this way. Such a discovery destroyed my faith in her love for me. Looking back, I realized that I had a biased view of things. I naively believed that my family genuinely cared about me and that I was genuinely loved. Looks like I was wrong. After attending a safety seminar at work and returning home late, I saw that my spouse was sleeping on the couch. Suddenly, a message came to my mobile phone with emojis similar to the ones I usually use in messages. Confused and stunned, I couldn't resist and began to find out the shocking truth that I had been looking for at least 5 months. I was familiar with the person whom we will call Alex, as he was her work colleague. Moreover, I even went to a barbecue at his house and had the opportunity to meet his family. Alex was married and had 3 children, the youngest of whom was only 2 years old. But when I read the messages, something inside me suddenly snapped. It was a difficult moment that completely changed me. As soon as I delved into their conversations, my feelings for Eva, whom I loved more than anything in the world, began to grow into resentment. Eventually, I got to the point where I felt emotionally cut off from everything, not just from Eve. It was as if a feeling of numbness had engulfed me entirely. Trying to gather evidence, I took pictures of the messages and went to bed. I couldn't sleep all night. I lay staring at the ceiling and lost in my thoughts. The next day, Eva was furious that I didn't wake her up before going to bed. She grumbled that her neck hurt because she slept on the couch all night, but I was not up to her complaints. On the contrary, I perceived the world muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume. Oddly enough, I was amazed at how little I cared about it. I felt an absolute sense of indifference. It's strange that I didn't feel any anger at the same time, considering all the circumstances. During breakfast, I was silent while my wife and daughter were talking enthusiastically. They didn't seem to notice any changes in me, as if I didn't exist. I couldn't get rid of the feeling of a stranger in my own skin. It was as if I had turned into another person, unrecognizable to myself, only hiding behind the facade of my former self. Everyday tasks turned into a robotic routine. I performed all the actions without delving into the essence. Strangely, my voice seemed to dissolve into silence, and depressingly, no one even noticed my absence. It became painfully clear that neither Eva nor my daughter have sincere affection for me. Despite the physical presence in the house, our communication was limited to their needs and desires. And I realized with a heavy heart that their love was only conditional. They talked to me, but not with me, if you know what I mean. I experienced waves of discomfort that periodically appeared and disappeared, sometimes they swallowed me whole. I wasn't okay in this state. I wondered for 5 days until finally Eva asked at dinner if anything had happened during all this time. I had not spoken 3 words with her or with our daughter. I didn't even answer her question. Instead, I just made a face expressing I'm fine, I don't know, and continued to eat. It looks like she accepted it. The next day, I decided not to go to work. As an employee of a local energy company, I am engaged in the repair of power lines and other similar works. Feeling anxious, I decided to collect a few random things along with hiking and hunting gear without having any specific plan. After collecting all the things, I loaded them into the car and went for a walk around the neighborhood. As a result, I found myself at the kitchen table, looking forward to my wife's return. When she came home with several bags of groceries, unpacking them, she immediately started talking about how the day had gone. I sat silently at the kitchen table, feeling a deep sense of pain. Despite the fact that when she entered the kitchen, she cast a brief glance in my direction, I did not pay attention to her. Soon after that, our daughter appeared and also did not pay attention to me. With their backs to me, they started talking about minor things for sale. At that moment, I experienced a huge sense of rejection, felt unnecessary, and completely alone. It was as if I was invisible, as if my presence did not matter at all, and I doubted whether it was worth paying attention to me at all. Reflecting on our shared past, I realized that I was never really dear to them. I was just an accessory in their life, a person of no importance. I felt a wave of suffering wash over me, and tears flowed down my face, but they didn't pay attention to my pain, which made me very angry. There was a glass of water in front of me. Suddenly, I got up from my seat and threw it violently into the tile over the sink. From the impact, the glass shattered into many pieces, showering everything around with glass fragments. Both of them turned around abruptly, their faces filled with anger. Confusion and uncertainty gripped them when they saw my distorted and tear-stained face. A heavy silence hung in the air for an eternity before I could finally speak. "Ava, I know perfectly well about your affair with Alex," I said, surprised at how clear my words were despite the severe pain from clenching my jaws. My daughter looked at Eva with disbelief in her eyes. "Is that true, Mom?" "What is it?" she asked. Ava, trying to justify her actions, began to explain. I got a brief apologetic look from her, and then the words "sorry, I can explain," but immediately her attention turned back to our daughter, and they began to argue hotly, as if I was not in sight. As a glass thrower, I watched their escalating arguments for a few minutes and then decided to leave. From the window of my car, I could still see them arguing in the kitchen, not paying attention to my departure. I stood in the parking lot for a few more minutes, then gave up and left. After about 15 minutes, Eva repeatedly tried to contact me, bombarding me with calls. After receiving a flurry of messages from both of them, I decided to just ignore them and eventually disconnected the phone. The next day, I withdrew half of our total funds and called my boss, saying that I could not determine the time of my return. In response, he threatened to fire me if I didn't come to work. Ignoring this, I calmly agreed and quickly ended the conversation. Indifference made me go to Alex's place of residence, where his wife opened the door. Handing her a copy of the incriminating messages, I told her about the insidious actions of Alex and his wife, leaving her sobbing on the landing. I spent the day seeking refuge in an inexpensive hotel on the outskirts of the city. The following days passed in a blur as I tried to cope with my emotions. Despite all my efforts, I was unable to make any tangible progress, and I spent most of my time fixated on finding reasons to continue living. It was during this turbulent period that I learned that Eva's older brother, a police officer named Bob, had somehow found me. Whether it was on the 3rd or 4th day, I can't say for sure. His sudden appearance took me by surprise, and he tried to get information from me by asking a number of questions, but I was silent, not wanting to talk. In response, Bob announced my arrest and quickly handcuffed me. But to my surprise, he deviated from the planned course and did not accompany me to the police station. Instead, he drove me back to my own house. Bob dragged me by force into the living room, where his wife and daughter wasted no time in unleashing their merciless stream of criticism on me. Despite their words, I chose to remain silent, just absorbing their amazement. When they showed their irritation towards me, the barrage of their claims seemed endless. Eventually, Ava's frustration reached its climax, and she asked me to speak out. I looked at her intently and calmly said that I had nothing to say to her. Bob immediately began to lose his temper and forcefully pressed me against the wall, insistently demanding that I not disrespect his sister. Watching Bob's explosive reaction, I experienced a peculiar sense of satisfaction. I don't understand why, but it brought me great joy and laughter. Bob's wife left him 4 months ago. Despite feeling sorry for Bob, I couldn't help but smile at his pitiful state. "Did you hurt your wife, Bob? Is that why she decided to leave you suddenly?" Bob hit me with such force that I fell to the floor. My wife and daughter screamed in panic as I tried to get to my feet. My laughter only got louder. He was out of control. I noticed blood on the floor, not understanding where it came from. Still handcuffed, I kept laughing. Perhaps it was the absurdity of the situation. With blood in my mouth, I defiantly spat it in Bob's face and said, "Go to hell, Bob." This time, the blow was strong enough to knock me unconscious. When I came to my senses, I realized that I was in the hospital. As soon as I opened my eyes, I couldn't help myself and I threw up on the floor, which indicated that I had received a concussion. Eva, Bob, and my daughter were nearby, talking to me, but I was at a loss to understand their words. The nurse intervened and asked them to leave. She gave me a vomit container and called someone to clean up. After taking my pulse, I confessed to her that my own family was the cause of my trouble and asked them to stay away from me. I made it clear that if they entered the room again, I would run away from all this. She firmly stated that it would be extremely unwise to run or even try to get up. At the same time, she promised that she would talk on my behalf with the hospital security. Fortunately, during my stay in the hospital, I did not encounter them again, which brought me great relief. For the first time recently, I felt a faint sense of calm and was finally able to collect my thoughts. The thought of denouncing Bob and getting him fired flashed through my mind, but I quickly dismissed this idea, realizing that in such a small town, colleagues would most likely defend him. Opposing his wife also seemed useless and illogical. Instead, I made a firm decision to disappear, to dissolve like a ghost. I didn't want to have any more connections and dealings with these people. With full determination, I wrote a letter addressed to each of them. I warned Bob that if he continued to bother me, I would take the necessary measures and report him. In a conversation with my daughter, I expressed my disappointment at Ava's betrayal and informed her that I would no longer play the role of a father in her life. In a detailed letter to Eva, I tried to give practical recommendations. I advised her to sell the house, as I would no longer be responsible for the mortgage and utilities. I explained that there was no question of any reconciliation or contact, especially after she organized her brother's brutal attack on me in front of them. I made it clear that I would no longer provide her with any help and support. If she wants to get a divorce, she will have to solve all the issues herself. I told her I was going to disappear and I didn't want to be found. I made it clear to her that any further interference in my life would lead to me ending all this and that we would never communicate again. At the end of our conversation, I said that she had caused me a lot of pain. I am very sorry that I said those words because it seems to me that I let her take away a part of me and cause even more pain. While in the hospital, I devised a plan to disappear. Eva kindly provided the hospital with fresh clothes, which were handed over to me. Then one evening, I just went out through the back fire escape. I involuntarily turned on the alarm, and a wave of panic seized me. Fortunately, I managed to escape without help. Back at the hotel, I quickly picked up my car and made a spontaneous decision to exchange it for a compact van. On this new means of transportation, I went on a journey. On the way, I bought a new phone but dialed only one familiar number, my father's number. In full openness, I shared all the details with him, stressing that if he tells someone else my new contact details, then I will inevitably disappear. Although I allowed him to contact him if necessary, especially to sign important documents. My sincere wish was that I would not be disturbed. In the first months, I mourned the passing of my former life. But then I was visited by the realization that I was grieving for the fruit of my imagination, for far-fetched memories that live only in my mind. The idea that I had a loving wife, a caring daughter, supportive family, and friends was just an illusion. These people have never really cared about me. Gradually, I began to restore a semblance of life, but this time I decided to become an invisible being. I separated myself from society, becoming just a mailbox to protect my valuables and money. I rented a safe deposit box. Now I'm doing different kinds of activities to earn a living. I hunt, fish, and gather for food. My monetary expenses are minimal, which allows me to constantly increase my savings. I am not involved in taxation and do not have a bank account. To questions about who I am, I answer with the pseudonym Fred, although this is not my real name. I purposefully try not to contribute to the life of society or to any other affairs. Like in my family, I remain inconspicuous. However, now this anonymity extends to strangers and not only to those who confess their love to me. To be honest, I began to appreciate this new invisibility. I make beer myself, move around a lot, and am not burdened with any obligations. I have the opportunity to work for my own pleasure, which allows me to devote a lot of time to immersion in nature and find solace in its tranquility. Together with my friends, I am engaged in hunting and fishing. In addition, I am proud to say that I am currently in the best physical shape of my entire life. In general, my life is gradually getting better because I have distanced myself from those who seek only to exploit me, pretending to care about me. As for my wife, daughter, old friends, and distant relatives, their whereabouts are unknown to me. The status of my marriage and possible alimony obligations also remains uncertain. The fate of my former home remains a mystery, but it has no meaning in my life since I have withdrawn from these worries. I often rejected my father's attempts to share information with me, abruptly turning him off. At the same time, he remains the only person from my past with whom I sometimes communicate. At this stage of my life, I feel liberated, calm, and contented, perhaps even bordering on happiness. Material goods do not matter much to me since I realize that I need very little. When I reach the end of my journey, I plan to liquidate all my possessions and destroy all remaining wealth. I intend not to leave behind any valuables so that nothing reminds others of my existence. After that, I will quietly go to the national park and disappear, leaving not a single soul who would know about my departure. Sometimes I come to shopping malls, train stations, and bus stations just to watch people. It is at these moments that I notice people similar to those I once was, people dedicated to society and families who seem indifferent to their efforts. These people work tirelessly, but they receive neither recognition nor gratitude. They are burdened with a sense of guilt, they are constantly under pressure, forcing them to make great sacrifices. This is an endless pursuit of material goods, designer clothes, large houses, and other small things that do not receive even simple gratitude. In many cases, there is a noticeable lack of gratitude or appreciation, often not expressed even by a simple smile. These people, like me once, are trying to deceive themselves by refusing to admit the truth, but I see it in them as I once saw it in myself. Deep down, they understand everything. I can identify their empty attached look because I once had the same. I feel relieved to let these thoughts out of my head. Looking through the messages, I found that I was experiencing emotions similar to those that were on the day when I tried to confront Eve. The world around me seemed muffled, and I felt a sense of disconnection. In general, I was uneasy. In search of solace, I contacted a friend who was fond of hunting and asked if it was possible to visit him. Before his arrival, we talked on the phone, and one of the first actions he took was to securely store all my hunting supplies. He looked very worried. He quickly contacted my father and stayed by my side until his arrival. Considering that I moved to another city, it took him more than 4 hours to get to me. During this time, we talked and sorted out a lot of unpleasant moments that bothered me. Unfortunately, I have a hard time remembering the specific details as it's all a bit hazy. As a result, my father came and took me to the doctor, after which I was placed in a psychiatric clinic. Doctors suspect that I have emotional and psychological trauma, possibly accompanied by depression. The doctor revealed several obvious signs such as numbness, excessive desire for self-isolation, unusual behavior, for example, laughing when beaten, feeling unloved and unworthy, as well as a tendency to recluse. Although I'm not sure of the exact diagnosis, I will have to wait for further examinations. I do not know what actions the medical staff will take and whether they will be able to provide any help at all. If the consultants approve and if my daughter agrees, I hope that in the near future, I will be able to talk to her. My father has already discussed this situation with her to some extent. He told me that she has feelings for me and wants my presence. My father is currently with me, and I will be under constant supervision for the next few days. The medical staff tried to inject me with some medications, but unfortunately, I had an adverse reaction. Therefore, tomorrow, they plan to try an alternative treatment. Surprisingly, Bob contacted me privately to apologize. Eva missed the real reason for my departure to the hotel, mentioning only the glass in the wall. Bob said that after learning the truth, he informed his superior about his actions. He claims that everyone who should have known has been informed. As a result of his actions, he was suspended from work and instructed to undergo anger management training. If I decide to file a complaint, he will be dismissed from his position. He has prepared for me an exhaustive written confession and all the necessary documents. If I want to sell it all, I have to read and sign it. Otherwise, if I decide not to follow this path, he will be allowed to continue working but with a reduction in salary and emotion. But I do not know what to do at the moment. I think it's best for me to focus on my own well-being. I currently feel overwhelmed and disoriented. During the last week, I have been restricted in internet access due to the hospital's decision to delete it. At first, my condition was quite unstable, but I'm glad to inform you that I was discharged on Friday morning. During my stay at the clinic, I received extensive therapy, which significantly improved my overall well-being. Although I still need daily treatment, I no longer need to stay in the hospital. I continue to experience the lingering effects of emotional trauma, and I have been diagnosed with mild post-traumatic stress disorder. In this regard, my behavior has worsened somewhat, but I am actively engaged in intensive therapy and have been prescribed medications to promote my recovery. Currently, I only occasionally resort to taking pills when I feel depressed. Although I still experience periodic bouts of excruciating pain that numb me, now they happen less often. I admit that my own behavior, especially isolation, probably made my situation worse. Fortunately, I have talked to my daughter many times, and she assures me that she has forgiven me. She never wanted me to feel humiliated, and she truly loves me. At first, it was hard for me to believe her words, but with time and deeper understanding, I realized that my doubts stem solely from within. I have apologized countless times, admitting my mistakes. Instead of continuing to apologize, she insisted that I stop. She has now moved away from her mother and lives with my brother and his family. She became very attached to his children, and my brother assured us that she could stay with him as long as she needed. Given my current circumstances, I cannot fulfill the role of a parent full-time, so for now, she will live with them. My brother took the initiative to organize therapy for her, and I intend to become the best father I can be in the future. After my wife, Ava, left our house and moved in with her parents, I found out that my father was secretly paying off the mortgage, preventing the house from being sold. The thought of returning to this place filled with memories terrifies me, so I decided to sell the house and start living a simpler lifestyle by moving into a miniature house, which will allow me to live closer to nature and reduce stress levels. Currently, I am exploring options for renting or buying a land plot in order to lead a more modest existence, at least for a while. Interestingly, my daughter fully supports this plan and enthusiastically explores miniature houses like an experienced professional. Alex is currently trying to mend relations with his wife and has completely severed ties with Eva. Eva regularly visits my father's house, begging him to contact me and give her the opportunity to talk to me. According to Eva's mother, she recently lost her job and is in an extremely depressed state, practically without leaving her room in her parents' house. According to her mother, almost everyone rejects her. Today, I have used the services of a lawyer and will start the divorce process as soon as possible. In addition, on Saturday evening, I spent time with my hunter friend, drinking his favorite whiskey with him. He's an incredibly loyal friend who may have saved my life. The devastating consequences of my wife's infidelity destroyed not only me but also my family. I was so broken that I couldn't even realize the extent of my own pain. Up to this point, I'd been deluding myself that I was coping with the situation, but in fact, I was barely able to stand on my feet. Today, I took the initiative to contact Bob's employer to defend his future work as a police officer. Bob personally visited me on Thursday and carefully prepared all the necessary documents for filing a complaint against him. Without any excuses, he openly admitted that his behavior had crossed all boundaries and expressed sincere remorse for having lost control of himself. He took full responsibility for his actions and admitted that it was entirely his fault. Moreover, he even urged me to continue filing a complaint. But I was thinking about Bob's character. I personally witnessed how he selflessly exposed himself to the blow, protecting an elderly woman from attack. I know many of his colleagues, and they often mention his exceptional willingness to help others. I also found out the reason for his divorce from his wife. Despite his low income, Bob generously donates 10% of his salary and devotes 3 days a week to volunteer work with the homeless. Unfortunately, his ex-wife found his unselfishness too strong and decided to divorce. But I firmly believe that Bob is a genuinely kind-hearted person, although there was one case when he lost control of himself. I also lost my way for more than 6 months. I am ready to endure any difficulties so that a person like Bob can continue to do good deeds. After my insistent request, he took me to the homeless people he is helping today, and this once again confirmed the importance of his actions. Thanks to therapy, I have made significant progress and am now in a relatively stable condition. Fortunately, my daughter is also doing well. But this path has turned me into a person who finds it difficult to trust others. Besides my daughter, I find solace in solitude and, as a rule, do not show myself in public. It's hard to tell if something inside me is broken. One can, of course, claim that I'm a fragmented version of my former self, but oddly enough, I find satisfaction in my current state. Embodying my tendencies to loneliness, I became a kind of partial hermit undergoing a kind of transformation. The old house was sold, and a rather modest house appeared in its place, in which my daughter and I now live. Unlike the miniature dwellings that are shown on TV, our new house has 2 separate bedrooms and a cozy combined living room and kitchen. Located in a secluded location on a wooded hillside, it has a porch that covers the entire house and offers stunning views. The serenity of this place brings me great joy because I deeply appreciate tranquility. In our new home, fortunately, we are surrounded by the beauty of nature. As for my personal life, I'm in the process of finalizing the divorce process. The expected completion date is about 3 months. My ex-wife, who repents of what she has done almost daily, begs to give her a second chance. She did not make any demands and took full responsibility for her betrayal without trying to justify herself. As a result of mediation, she generously granted me all our common property and full custody of the child. The only request she made to me was the opportunity to visit the child often in order to establish a relationship with her daughter. Although she kindly offered to cook and clean for me, I hesitate to accept her help as I don't want to feel indebted to her. Instead, I plan to do the housework myself because the apartment is still small, and I think it's important for my daughter to have responsibilities and not become spoiled. Unfortunately, my daughter's relationship with my future ex is very tense, and it is unclear how they will develop. For those who may suspect that her proposal is a manipulative tactic aimed at reuniting with me, I assure you that she openly and honestly told about her intentions. She expressed hope for a reconciliation and promised to make efforts to achieve this goal. I am comforted by the fact that she has committed herself to observing the boundaries I have set, which allows me to be satisfied. From my point of view, I expressed my desire to end the relationship, but I accepted that our relationship could not be restored. Now our role is reduced to being joint parents and nothing more. Insisting on separate custody was very important to me because it can be difficult to reverse the decision on full custody after the divorce is completed. Now that I have regained clarity, I believe it is extremely important for our daughter to maintain a relationship with her mother. I forgave her and moved on, ready from now on to live according to my own choices and principles. As for the fortune, I plan to give my ex-wife half either at the last moment or immediately after the divorce. Throughout our marriage, we have been accumulating these funds together, so it would be fair if she gets an equal share. But I'm interested to know if she will really go all the way and give me everything. This will somehow help me in the process of recovery because she seems to be sincerely remorseful. Unfortunately, my future ex-wife is still struggling with difficulties, and some may describe her as a complete wreck. She actively attends counseling, as do we all, including family therapy in the interests of our daughter. I am fully prepared to correct my mistake and do everything possible to make amends, especially for the sake of our daughter. My daughter is incredibly perceptive. Although I believe she has forgiven me, she is closely watching my actions towards her mother. I am determined to set a positive example, so I will behave exemplary. Coping with the consequences was very difficult, but I'm finally starting to restore stability, even if irreparable damage is done to our family and marriage. In the end, we will find solace. But a little time passed after our divorce and I gave my ex-wife half of all the funds, and saw her true face. My daughter and I, until that time, and it's been 6 months since the divorce, can't recover from the shock that hit us after the act of my wife. As soon as she got half of all the savings, and I was the only guardian of my daughter, my ex-wife disappeared in an unknown direction, and until that time, no one knows where she is. According to her mother, most likely she went in search of new experiences.